In this episode, I speak to Vanessa Barzasi from BioBright. BioBright is a startup which have been working with ports across the world to pilot their innovative algae solutions, which are helping to reduce carbon emissions and water pollution in ports. It was really interesting to speak to Vanessa about how a nature-based solution is being used in a commercial context, not what I'm familiar with, of course, in a charitable context to reduce carbon emissions. And we discuss not only the beneficial effects of algae, but also carbon credits and algae as a business solution in multiple sectors addressing carbon emissions. I started off by asking Vanessa how algae can be used to reduce companies' greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you so much for inviting me today. And well, yeah, unfortunately, not a lot of people are aware or know that algae are actually very good in absorbing CO2 emission. Not just algae, but also seaweed. They can absorb or sequestrate CO2 emission faster compared to trees. And a lot of people don't know that the trees industry, like for example, planting trees. It's not very sustainable because, I mean, you need to have a huge piece of land where you can plant these trees, and
Right.
then this is going to take years in order to grow. And then this also, for example, during the winter, you cannot see a lot of trees with leaves. And this is a problem because trees they can absorb CO2 emission through their leaves. So if they're going to lose that, they're not going to absorb or release any type of CO2 emission. Well, for algae or seaweed, the entire plant is actually able to absorb a CO2 emission, and they do it faster. And then this it doesn't require like any piece of land in order to do that. And I'm referring to micro and microalgae as well, not just seaweed. So yeah, I mean, I'm not the expert, I'm not the scientist behind the business. It's more my brother, but we realized by doing different experiments in the lab, by reading different journals, articles, we realized that, wait a minute, actually algae are very good in absorbing CO2 emission.
Yeah, so let's get stuck into that. So how is BioBright, your company, using algae? Um, how does that fit into a business plan, if you like?
Yeah. Well, we started our business in 2021, and our idea was again using algae, but different type of algae, in order to create, for example, natural mood lighting. So if we use bioluminescent algae, if you stimulate them, they can create this very nice blue light. And we were thinking, okay, we can use this in order to create natural mood lighting without using the electricity. And then during our journey, we discovered that, okay, it's difficult to manipulate them. They are toxic, and there are a lot of problems behind that we need to solve. So we decided to, why we don't use just the normal algae that you can find, for example, in the sea or in the ocean. So we realized that they are very good as a substitute for plants and flowers. So we started to selling them as an interior design decoration. We were also inside the Roja London Gallery in London to show them that algae can actually be very sustainable compared to flowers, compared to normal plants. We don't use pesticides. They can live longer. They can absorb CO2, purify the air. And then by speaking with, again, with different ports, we realized that they struggle so much to reduce the CO2 emission. And this is because there lack of data, lack of standards, and most of the solutions that are in the market right now, they're not sustainable for all ports. So we realized that, okay, why don't we use algae, cultivating them inside their arbor, for example? And then we spoke with different ports. We also collaborate with the Port of Tyne and the Thames Estuary Board Growth on a collaborative case study with also Catapult. So this was a grant. And then we realized, okay, they're actually interested in our solution. So this is our journey, how we came across to algae.
Yeah, so but basically you're selling these plants to ports specifically, is that right? So that they can sort of, is it reduce their emissions or are there benefits on the water quality? What exactly is the sort of pitch there for selling this product?
Yeah. So, well, to our normal customers, we just like selling the jar, the
Mm,
algae, the salt, and the nutrients for the algae. But with boards, is slightly more complicated because we develop like type of cages where we can put the algae inside, and then we are going to most of the time implementing them close to the arbor wall or below the buoy. So by doing that, the algae can sequestrate the CO2 from the atmosphere and from the water, can also absorb zinc, copper, nitrate, phosphate, and ammonia from the water. And then it's also easy for us to harvest them. And we do have some monitoring system attached to this algae cultivation where we can give it the data to the port regarding, okay, this is how much CO2 is in the atmosphere, this is what is the water quality, and this is how the algae are performing. So yeah.
yeah. Now, I really
Is
want
it-
to get into the monitoring system, but before we get to that, could you
Yeah.
just like how much carbon are we talking? Like how what is the sort of impact that a plant can have? Like how big are they and how much CO2 can they sequester over how long?
This is actually a very good question. And we did some experiment in the lab. And right now we're trying to do this pilot project
Mm,
in a real environment. But in the lab, we had like very good results regarding the CO2 emission that has been absorbed by the algae. So we started with like a very small amount, which is like 400 grams of algae. And we calculate that this algae can absorb CO2, can absorb 800 grams of CO2 every hour. And we compare these to
wow.
an oak tree. So an oak tree, a fully grown oak tree, can just absorb 2.4 grams of CO2 every hour. So you can see that the difference is quite big. And what we wanted to do in ports is sequestrate millions of tons of CO2
Mm,
emission. Because if we just place a few grams of algae, it's not going to create
sure.
any impact. But with a big amount of algae, we can absorb tons of million tons of CO2 emission.
Millions of tons.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to take 3 years
Mm,
or maybe longer, depending on how much CO2 you want to sequestrate. But yes, it's possible. Of course, not immediately because the algae need to grow. We need to also adjust the quantity of algae depending
mm.
on the data that we receive. But yes, we're able to do that in 3 years' time, depending again on the
Wow.
size of the port.
So they grow, so presumably they grow and then as they grow they're absorbing the carbon as part of their as a plant, right? So how does
Yeah.
that work? I mean, what happens when they die, or do you say that you harvest them? How do you ensure that the carbon is not sort of being released at the end of their lives?
Okay, so well, we can do two things. So the first one, we can sink the algae on the bottom of the ocean, so the
Okay.
carbon that they sequestrate is locked. Or we can reutilizing this algae in different ways. So we realized that many companies, especially when I was in Canada, I realized that many companies need these algae in order to, for example, I don't know, create biofuel or creating bioplastics or biofertilizer. So they really need this type
Mm,
of algae, but the problem is that there aren't enough. So the second idea is to selling to them. So of course, some of the CO2 is going to be released in the atmosphere, but it's going to be less. And then is we tried to create like a circle, so nothing is going
mm.
to. So we are trying to slow down, reducing the level of emissions. But of course, some of them, if we wanted to sell it to this type of company, is going to be released.
Yeah, no, of course. And so that would be sort of factored into the calculation to the company
Yeah.
when you sold them. Yeah, so how does that work in practice? Like why would a port be interested in this? Is it for net zero purposes or
Well, for different purposes, because when we did the business case study, we realized that yes, they need. data because many ports, and I was very shocked when I spoke with the port of Singapore, that they have no idea regarding the water quality in the port or regarding the CO2.
Mm,
And I was shocked because Singapore is one of the biggest ports around the world, one of the most important as well.
mm,
And so they had no clue. And same also on the St. John's, Port of St. John's in Canada, Halifax, Port of Halifax, Port of Tyne, Port of London. So different ports around the world, they have the same problem, which is like they have no idea regarding the water quality. And if they know the data regarding their water quality is because they're doing manual sampling, and this is expensive, is not reliable
mm,
because you normally do this water sampling when there is a problem in the water. So you cannot track the water quality every day for an entire year. So they're just doing when there is like an oil spill, for example. And so they're not in control of their data, they're not in control of their emissions. So we realized that they're interested on a monitoring system that can give it to them the data. And at the same time, so also, okay, it's interesting that you're giving to us the data, but we need also something that can help us to reduce the CO2. So they're interested on both parties of
mm,
our solution. And because, like for example, electric vessels are very good for ports that, like for example, the Port of London, for example, is very good. They can use electric vessels. They have the facilities. But if you need to use an electric vessel from, I don't know, Port of St. John's to, I don't know, the Port of Tyne, this electric vessel cannot actually do very long distance.
mm.
So again, it depends on the port, and sometimes they don't have something that is actively absorbing CO2.
So this might be something that would sort of reduce the port's overall emissions,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
to quite substantially, or
Well, we said that we can absorb 70% of their CO2 emission in 3 to 4 years.
really?
Of course, yeah, this takes time, and
Mm,
again, it depends on the port size. But at the same time, so we can also reduce the level of nitrates, the level of ammonia, level of phosphate,
mm,
the water as well, and
mm.
improving the biodiversity since the biodiversity in the port is really bad.
So there's this dual climate and pollution benefit in one go. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. And it's a shame
amazing.
that don't understand that algae have a lot of power.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny because obviously my background is at Eden is funding environmental projects, and we're actually looking at a sea kelp project, um, which is quite similar, like sort of much like tree planting, but underwater. But it's fascinating what you've created in it being specific to ports and obviously having the these sort of cages and the monitoring system as well, um, being able to provide a business case for it simultaneously. Yeah, how does that monitoring system work? I mean, it sounds incredible to, in addition to what you're already doing, to be able to sort of track, is that right, in live time,
Yeah.
the emissions?
Yeah, because we realized that at the beginning we started with the algae, and then we realized, okay, but we need to have some data. We need to give some data to ports,
Mm,
like saying, okay, this is the total CO2 that is in the atmosphere. This is the CO2 that is in the water. This is the water quality. And also this is the algae performance, because right now there is not in the market something that can calculate how much CO2 the algae can absorb.
mm,
So what we develop is a system that has different sensors. So sensor for CO2 in the atmosphere, sensor for CO2 in the water, different type of sensor for the pH, for the level of nitrates, level of copper in the water.
right.
And then we also create some calculations that can give it to you some data regarding how much CO2 has been absorbed by the algae, because right now there is not a sensor that can do that or any technology that can do that. So we developed this calculation in order to have this data.
Yeah, yeah, that's so fascinating. Um, I mean, I've got to ask the difficult question on this, of course, which is about companies, um, you know, reducing their own emissions and whether obviously there's always that risk, isn't there, with funding any climate project, whether they're going to sort of put the funds into a project like this instead of sort of focusing on the actual source of their own emissions. Um, is that something you've sort of thought about, or do you feel like that's something there's really a problem for the ports themselves? Um, how do you sort of go about thinking about that?
This is a risk, and of course, we take into account that. But we realize by speaking with different ports around the world, they already have a plan.
Hmm,
So they're going to have, and the things that we always say is that BioBright is not going to solve all the ports' problem. So we're trying to help them to achieve this net zero. But if you're going to use just our solution, of course, you need to put in practice other type of solution as well. Otherwise, you will never reach the net zero and you will never be sustainable.
hmm,
So every time we speak with ports, they have a plan. So they are trying to put some electric vessels, for example, for short distances. They're trying to have a look to hydrogen and ammonia or nuclear power as well. So they're trying to see different solutions.
hmm.
And BioBright is just, okay, this is another solution that can help us to achieve this net zero. I totally agree with you that there are many businesses that, of course, they buy carbon credits, so at least they can show that, okay, I'm doing something for the environment, and therefore I
Yeah,
will not pay carbon
done and
taxes.
dusted. Yeah,
Yeah, but in reality, it's not the right way, and we tend to not work with these people that are just focusing on carbon credits, because we wanted to help our customers. Yes, reducing CO2, but at the same time, you need to put in place other solutions as well.
yeah. Have you ever considered actually, but registering your work in the future on a carbon registry, or is it that's just not something you would consider for some of these reasons?
Well, yes, we thought about that, but
Mm,
in the future, also because I mean, what we are doing, if we're going to, for example, register ourselves
mm,
um, in like as a carbon credit market,
mm.
we can show to our customers that, okay, this is the amount of CO2 that the algae has been absorbed, and this is the CO2, and we can do it even with ports because they can see our solution every day since we're doing in the harbor. But our mission is to do not just absorb CO2, is to also purify the water since there are actually a lot of problems on that with oil spill or a high level of nitrates or algae bloom, for example. And we also wanted to really improve the marine biodiversity that sometimes is not very
Sure.
well understood.
Yeah, well, actually, yeah, I'd love to know more about that. Is there specific benefits to taking these sort of toxins out of the water? How does that affect biodiversity? Presumably, there's a positive impact.
Yeah, definitely is a positive impact. I'm not the scientist
No,
behind
yeah,
that.
of course.
I will try to answer this question with the knowledge that my brother, which is the co-founder, told me.
He's a
And
scientist, isn't he? Yeah.
yeah, so he told me that, for example, what we wanted to do in Canada is
Mm,
partner up with um, um, fish farmers
mm,
because they have this high level of nitrates in the water, and therefore this is going to affect the quality of food. And
right.
so yeah, so by placing that algae, we can reduce this high level of nitrate. So therefore, you're going to have like a better quality of food, and the fish are not going to die, something like that. So we're going to purify the water. We were thinking also to use algae in order to reduce the level of noise in the water.
Right.
We need, of course, to test that, but we were thinking to do something like that.
Why is
Uh,
that a problem? Underwater noise pollution.
Yeah, it's actually a big problem for the
Right.
mammals.
Ah.
So there are some places. When I was in Canada, I spoke with one person from Lloyd's Register, and I didn't know that. But some vessels, sometimes they need to reduce the speed, because by reducing the speed, you're going to reduce the noise. But you need to be careful, because if you're going to reduce the speed, you're going to create a different type of noise that can be harmful for mammals or for other species that are living there. So there are a lot of research and a lot of companies that are trying to reduce the level of noise in the water, especially for mammals.
Mm.
So yeah, I
Yeah,
didn't know
that's so
that.
interesting. Yeah, that's so interesting. Well, it's really interesting because it's something, it's an area that, we're so familiar with the problems on land, whether it's, deforestation or biodiversity loss on land, but when it comes to, marine life, it's something, it feels more detached from us. We're not as familiar with the species and so forth. So that is really interesting to hear about. And yeah, I mean, I really hope that you can scale it up at these ports because it's something that, I mean, who knows? It could be even be something that effective in other contexts. Um, like I know that there are other charities, for example, working on, like I say, the seaweed um, afforestation, basically, all that sort of thing. Um, but yeah, I'd love to ask you about the difference actually between working in a sort of commercial context compared to a charitable context, just for my own interest, because obviously we are working with charities funding projects that have similar benefits for nature and climate. Um, do you find that it's helpful to, to say, well, we're going to have this nature benefit, this carbon benefit, but it's going to be on your doorstep, and it's going to be like, how does that play out when you're trying to sell it from a business perspective? Um, yeah.
Well, I believe that each organization or each businesses um, are acting in a different way depending on what they want to achieve in 5 years' time or 10 years' time.
Mm,
And they also are trying to work out on the business model. So they need to, both a charity, but also like a normal commercial business, they need to survive. They need to pay the people, and sometimes you need to have a salary because, I mean, yes,
yeah.
we're doing something amazing, but at the end of the day, you need to eat, like
Yeah.
everyone. So I believe that it depends on what you want and what you want to achieve in your business. So for us, we are more in a commercial side
Mm,
because we realize that okay, ports have a problem, so we
mm,
can help them to do that, to reduce their CO2, to reduce water pollution, to give the data that they need. But we don't want to stop it here because, as you said, like the ocean is really big, and there are other problems as well that maybe we're not aware. So we wanted to also help, like for example, mammals or other type of species. So we really wanted to innovate. And if we have these, if we generate revenue through boards, so we can
mm.
also invest on innovation. We can also I don't know, using algae in a different type of sectors as well. Like, for example, I don't know, mining industry, if we can reduce these wastewater ponds by using algae and reducing the toxicity of this water, is something amazing. Like we're using a natural-based solution that can also give benefit to other industries. So this is where we see our business in
Yeah.
5 years or 10 years. Like we want to bring this benefit, bring this innovation to other sectors. And if you're a charity, sometimes you are kind of restricted with the fundings and donations.
Mm,
So it's difficult to do that. It's not impossible. I'm not saying that, and I'm not saying that I don't know, have a commercial, being a commercial site or being a charity is actually better. So it depends on your business, depending on what you want to achieve, what is your business revenue models, so all of these things. So I don't see this I don't know. I don't see that there is a right or wrong answer.
Sure.
So it depends on what you wanted to achieve, I think. And for us, we wanted to innovate, and we wanted to bring this benefit in more sectors.
Yeah, well, it's really fascinating. I mean, it sounds like a very unique solution. Have you had good responses then? What has the response been from the ports that you've spoken to?
Well, we just did this change just recently. So we started to see more traction compared to before
Mm.
because, like, for example, we worked with the Port of Tyne. We worked with the Thames Rebirth Growth for a business case study. So we spoke with the environmental agency that they are interested in trying to do a pilot project. So we're planning to do that with the Port of London. We spoke with, for example, DP World, that again, they might use our solution in Dubai, where there are new law coming to place, new law that are forcing them to actually reduce the level of pollution in the water. So in Canada, we saw that the Port of St. John's and Port of Halifax wanted to do a pilot project with us, and we're trying to penetrate that market with also like doing some partnership with fish farmers. And in Malta, we have been accepted to the Malta Accelerate, where the CEO of one of the ports in Malta wants to work with us and do these pilot projects. We also been in the Treasury Med Port catalog, where all the Mediterranean ports can actually access to our solutions. And there is the MPA and PSA in Singapore that are interested in our solution. So we saw that there are different ports around the world, not just in the UK, but different ports around the world that are interested in our solution and are interested to do this pilot with us.
Well, it's fascinating. It's been fascinating to hear about such a unique product in such a niche area. And it's really encouraging that you are getting these positive responses. But I think that might be a good note to wrap up on. Thank you so much for joining the podcast, Vanessa. It's been really interesting to speak to you.
Thank you so much for having me as a guest.